Welcome to the Trauma Informed Lens podcast. Each week, Matt, Curt, Jerry, and the occasional special guest explore how the trauma-informed paradigm challenges traditional beliefs and approaches concerning a wide variety of areas. This podcast addresses psychological trauma in an educational manner and is not designed to replace mental health treatment. If anything in this podcast makes you feel uncomfortable or anxious, please talk to a mental health professional.
Welcome, friends, to episode 56 of the Trauma Informed Lens podcast. I'm back today with Curt and Jerry, and we're going to try a different approach to the podcast today, something that if it goes well, I hope we do on a lot of different topics, and that centers around what I'm calling the trauma-informed life. I believe all of our topics, for the most part, even though we've talked a little bit about leadership, self-care, has really been about professional aspects of trauma-informed services, schools, care, whatever thing we put behind the trauma-informed piece. But I think for all of us, the understanding of trauma makes us look at life differently as well. I know the number one piece of feedback I get from my trainings is I understand those I work with better. But the number two, and usually the one people come up and tell me and doesn't make the eval is, you know, I understand myself and my family a lot better as well. And so I think that this paradigm that we've been talking about now for 55 episodes, this being number 56, is not just about professional, but how we look at larger issues, including our own life and behavior as well. So we're gonna give this a try on a topic I've been dying to talk about with Curt and Jerry, which is football. So and to do this, I will be, I believe, the devil's advocate. And just so folks know out there, I'm probably going to make a stronger argument than I normally would, because I believe everybody comes to their own conclusions on things. But let's have some fun and argue about it. So with that said, bright, shiny objects of the week this week. I will start out. I just got back. I'm a little tired today because my flight was delayed out of Phoenix, where it was rainy and 70 the whole time I was there. I'd never seen a cloud in Arizona in all my other trips, and it rained 8 inches yesterday. So, but I was at a medical respite training symposium for the National Healthcare for the Homeless Council, and it was the first time really there was a national meeting around this topic. And one of the things I just love when, because of lack of resource, I don't love lack of resources, but I love it when we are creative and innovative in the helping professions. And what people were seeing is that hospitals would discharge folks without stable housing, like they would discharge probably most people listening to this podcast. And when they discharge folks like, you know, that have stable housing, like I'm lucky enough to have, my recovery at home would be pretty good. But for folks that have to live in shelters or on the street, what they found as they came back, I think it was like 65 to 80% came back into inpatient within a week after discharge. And so a lot of great providers, not with real structured federal funding of any sort, have created these respites so that people have a safe place to go and recover from either injuries or severe illnesses as well. And it's just really cool to see this national movement. We have a great one in Colorado Springs that my good friend Greg Morris runs and has been running. He was one of the innovators in this. And it's just really cool to see how, you know, with a little innovative thinking, we can fill the gaps. And now hospitals are understanding that, hey, you know, if somebody doesn't come back and we decrease inpatient stays, this is a much better way to, and a much less expensive way to help people. So just cool that a lot of passionate people saw a problem and are starting to solve that problem in a cool way. So that's my bright, shiny object of the week. Curt, what do you got this week?
I've a couple of them to make quick mention of. First is certainly a bright, shiny object for me, as I have my parents visiting with me for the week, which is, I'm really excited to have them around and get that chance to sit down and talk with them. I always enjoy it. And also I had a really wonderful meeting last week with a local county here actually in northern Colorado about more of trauma sensitive and trauma informed approaches with foster and kinship care. And so that was really fun, kind of like you were saying, Matt, like having innovative approaches and people who want to engage in creative processes and things like that is really energizing and fun. And I was really appreciative of the opportunity to talk with them and make some plans about what we could do over the next year at least. So it was really enjoyable, and I really enjoyed those. So I'm excited for that.
Very cool. Very cool. I get to go to California next week to train kinship providers. So it's always an honor to work with those folks. So I'm really excited about that. Jerry, what's your bright, shiny object of the week this week?
No, I think in line with sports, we have a unique kind of situation here in Denver recently. In two of our major sports, baseball and in football, we have local young men playing on teams. And it's been interesting to see the impact of not just the sport, but the kind of ownership that people take when somebody from their own town is playing. Both last night for the Rockies and pitching, and also for the Broncos running back. So I think, there's lots of kind of downsides to sports, but in terms of bringing people together and feeling a sense of connectedness, I think this is a pretty unique kind of experience to have one person from your hometown playing in one of your professional sports, but to have two people is pretty unique. So I want to give a shout out to the Rockies last night for winning, and one of our own community members was on the mound and pitching for them. So give a shout out to them.
Yeah, the Rockies game, and we're recording this right after the Rockies beat the Cubs, which were the team of my youth, though they let me down so much. I don't watch a lot of baseball, but what I love about baseball is when it's that elimination game, because they just throw I thought I might have to go in and pitch at some point. It's like, how many pitchers do these, somebody come in and throw two pitches and then they go out. I love elimination baseball. Is a special thing to watch, especially after 18 hours of watching this game that went to God, it just seemed to go on forever. My flight was delayed and I was still watching it in the lift on the way home, but it was a spectacular game, and glad all that time ended on a positive note, at least for me. I know our Chicago listeners might not think the same, but hey, maybe it's our turn this year. So very cool. So I will put forth some of my thinking here, and I'm really excited for this discussion, but I think it's safe to say we have three football fans on this podcast. And as I like to tell people, I was born Roman Catholic in South Bend, Indiana. So if there is a higher power God and, he has judgment over us, I figured if I wasn't a Notre Dame fan, I'd probably be going to hell. So, I grew up a Notre Dame fan, and then Indianapolis Colts, love watching them. And I spent, I realized nowadays that I probably spent 8 to 10 hours every weekend watching football. And just even though I grew up playing basketball, still love the sport. I don't think there's probably a better game right now than football to watch. Especially great football is spectacular. My struggle, though, as of late, which I'll just kind of throw out my conclusion, is I haven't watched football for a couple seasons, is I was really, really struggling with the trauma football was causing folks. And while the traumatic brain injuries were part of that, Junior Seau, who I grew up watching, it really, really bothered me that the guy, just committed suicide, but thought it would be good to shoot himself in the heart so his brain could be studied by science. And when you see a lot of the stories that are coming out of the resulting trauma that sort of results from the physical injuries from the brain, And I think wondering if these injuries happen or start happening even in the early teen years, which we know are highly developmental for folks. You know, as a result of all that, I, as someone who tries to eliminate as much harm in my own behavior as possible, I thought my consuming football was not very trauma informed. Also try to be as nonviolent as possible in my consumerism and behaviors as well. And I thought there might be better ways to entertain myself than to watch people kind of do permanent damage to their brain. And, you know, that they're resulting, we see a lot of domestic violence issues, you know, pretty horrific murder suicides happen. And again, when they look at these folks' brains, we see CTE, you know, high levels, 3, 4, I think 5 is the highest. So that there's this biological damage that then ends up in very traumatic situations later in life. And I think my understanding of trauma in the brain has made it really, really difficult to continue watching football. And I will be honest, I miss it. So I just kind of wonder, because football's in the news for this a lot. And I kind of wonder, like, you guys' think is, I know, again, 3 fans of the game here. And Curt, I know you played a lot in your youth as well. Just kind of how do you think now about football, but what you consume, what you support with your, you know, when you sit and watch something, you're kind of showing, you know, consuming it in a way. And just would love to get your guys' opinion. I kind of really want to lose this argument, to be very honest with you. But I'd love to get your opinion about how your understanding of trauma and neurobiology impacts how you watch the game of football.
So when you say argument, so we clarify, your argument is that we should not watch football if we want to be.
That is my argument, though again, I just preference that with everybody makes their own choices.
I just want to make sure I know what the argument is.
I just want the listeners to know I'm not this hardcore, and if you at the end of this decide to continue watching football, I am still your friend. I want to. Sure. That I'm going to try to make the argument. So just for fun.
Well, definitely we can go to there are lots of ways to talk about it, right? And we can go back to one of the kind of concepts that we've all talked about a lot is the existence of dilemmas in any choice that you have to make.
Yes.
Right. So there are many good things that come out of sport, and then there are negative things that come out of sport. When you I think of a lot of things like, what do we know about teamwork? Or what do we know about being a part of something larger than yourself, or being a part of a team, having a common goal? Like, a lot of things that make us really effective in our endeavors as human beings come out of what we learn from sports. It's kind of a microcosm of study that you can do, right? You can find out what happens when we do this with teamwork. Do we win? Yeah. Right? And actually, the consequences are not very big if you don't win at a sport. As they say, it's just a game.
Unless your dad was a high school basketball coach in Indiana. So to just throw that out there, yes, some of us did have big consequences, but point well taken.
So I think, like most things, you approach it with, there's good and bad to most things. There's positive and negative aspects of most things. And I don't know very many things that, I'm sure we could find something, but I don't know very many things that are all 100% good, and I don't know very many things that are all 100% bad.
Mm-hmm. So Jerry, I'd love to get your initial thoughts on this as well, as I know a Broncos season ticket holder, I believe.
So I guess my thought is similar to Curt's, is that there's lots of really, really positive. As a matter of fact, individuals who engage in sports overall are healthier. Mm-hmm. The issue of being part of a team, the issue of working towards a goal, the issue of managing stress, the issue of cooperation towards a goal. There's a lot of really positive things. So on the other hand, there's danger. And that's the nature of life itself. That I think that I don't have as much struggle with the issue that people get hurt. What I do have an issue with is that there's a financial incentive that makes it hard for people to make good decisions, right? Is that if I go out and I do something as I did and I really enjoy, if I ride my bike and I'm going over things, I'm making a decision about this fun and I might get hurt to kind of do it. But if you said I'm going to pay you $100 million and you're coming from poverty, if you drive your car over this cliff and there's a good chance you may never walk again, is that really consent? Right? Is that so, to me there's so many really difficult issues when it comes to professional sports that I think that sometimes we get caught up in one of these and kind of blow it up. And then, or we go the other way and we get into sports are bad and we shouldn't kind of do that. Right? And the question is how do we understand sports? Because it obviously has been in almost every culture, in every society that we have. So there's some evolutionary benefit from this process. And yet there's levels of risk, and then there's levels of exploitation of those risks. Mm-hmm. So to me those things are separate issues that really we need to kind of look at. And, I know that the Child Trauma Academy is launching a NMT sports kind of focus, looking at how neurobiology, coaching, and others can be enhanced by the knowledge of brain development and stress response systems, and how we can actually build resilience in children and young adults through this process. So I think that I like the game. I played sports. I probably made bad decisions about playing sports when I was hurt, and probably made bad decisions around sports. But I don't think I was ever in a position where I felt my livelihood depended on sports, or my families, or my next generation of family. Mm-hmm. You gotta look at that. So
I think that's an important.
When I see people struggling to get back in games because of money or change, that really is where I begin to have a dilemma about watching professional sports, as opposed to the potential injury of what grown adults make decisions about, to kind of look at those things to kind of. So I do struggle with the economics of where sporting has gotten to.
I wonder, Matt, if that's one of the part of your thinking about your decision to not watch professional football. Separate and things like there's the professional part of sport, which is kind of, we'll call it tip of the iceberg, and then there's the rest of the iceberg, which is non-professional sport, and there's a lot of that going around. So is that part of your decision making, and as you think about it?
Honestly, not really. Now there's a couple levels, because I don't watch college football anymore either. So and I think we could probably have a whole episode on college sports, because I don't think, the corruption there, at least you get paid because you make somebody billions of dollars. You make somebody billions of dollars in college, and you don't even get paid to do it. So I think that is another issue. But and I would like to absolutely agree with you guys on what you said about sports. As someone who played basketball all up through college, I believe my passion for leadership, teamwork, came out of a lot of that. Also saw that, what my family went through, because even though my dad was a teacher / coach, in Indiana, you were a coach first. So, for me, it's more of, and I would also agree with Jerry too, is there's risk in everything. My worst medical injury ever is a block and a half from my house as I was running. So every time you walk out the door, there is some risk. But I think, for me, it's almost at this point a consumeristic perspective. It's like, where do I put my time and my energy, and can I support whether it's college or whether it's pro football, knowing that there is a level of I think things wrong with it on a business level, but also that I know that people participating in this and entertaining me really are paying for it in very severe ways later on in their life, whether it's their knee, but even I think more tragic, the rates of dementia. I mean, you look at some of these NFL, especially linemen on both sides of the ball, and by the age of 50, their health outcomes are really, really scary. And so to me, I agree with there's so much good about sports. I just wonder for you both, is the cost of those entertaining us on the field worth it? I guess for our entertainment value, because I would answer that yes for the NBA, the other kind of professional sport that I watch. I would say I have no problem watching the NBA. There's things there I've maybe changed, but I think they handle race issues a lot better. I think they pay their players. So I don't have the same problem there with that other professional league. So again, my question back is the cost to the people entertaining you worth the entertainment value that we're getting individually and as a community out of their pain and suffering?
The answer has to be yes, because I watch it.
And you know I love you, Jerry.
So
think about this stuff too.
Is there a dilemma in watching it? Yes. Right? So is there a dilemma in watching it? Yes. And do I sometimes struggle with these issues that you're raising? Yes. Right? But clearly there's a difference, and I commend you. There's no argument here about you making your life decision to do it. You make decisions about what food you eat to kind of look at, right? That I don't make to kind of look at that, because overall this is important to you. So I can't argue with your decisions. What I like I said is, I wonder for many of those young men who play professional sports, what would their life have been without sports? What would their life have been without football and the opportunity to get them to the place that they're at, right? And so at some point, it tipped over from this was a really positive thing in their lives to do it, to this was a really dangerous thing that I'm getting paid a lot of money to do, right? And so that's why this is a dilemma, is that for many of those young men, they were engaged in things that allowed them, when you hear them talk about themselves, when you see what they can contribute to the community, what the models that they serve for other young African-American or poor, they serve a really important function, right? So when we look at one piece of it, I think we have to look at, just like trauma, you have to understand things in the whole life experience of something.
Yeah.
So where in those people's lives was this such a positive thing that they're willing to take that risk on this end to kind of look at it? And when they're all done, I wonder what their decision, as how many of them support their kids being in football to go through what they did. What do they say is, I want a better life for my child? I don't know. It would be an interesting kind of study to look at. Does the type of decisions being made change because of what they went through? But I do think, I wish in our society we can maximize the benefits of sports and minimize the risks of sports.
I think too, Matt, one of the things that I appreciate about your approach to making this decision is that you approached it from a position of trying to be aware of as much information as you could before you made a decision, right? So it doesn't really matter to me what the decision is. Like, I mean, and then Jerry well said, right? Like, I would support your decision 100%, although I'd love to sit down and watch a football game with you. I would enjoy that experience.
Notre Dame's playing Virginia Tech this weekend would be a really good one to watch, yes.
But I think approaching decision-making in the way of approaching it from a position of awareness and then making decisions, I think is a really, I mean, you're giving a good example of doing that and making what I'm sure is a really difficult decision.
Yeah. Well, and I think, Jerry, again, I agree with your points, especially about the people who have made millions of dollars and the cost benefit of that. And I think it was Ed Reed who talked about this, who was a Baltimore Raven. I hope I'm getting, and he's like, yeah, I knew this could mess me up, but it gave my family so many opportunities that I would have never had. And I appreciate that he, you know, in his 30s and now probably late 30s, can look back at this as a logical way. In some ways, you know, and being a high school athlete who was all into my sport, there wasn't a whole lot of logical decision-making going on. Like, you know, if you told me, hey, you know, you can be Michael Jordan until you're 31, but there's a 50% chance you would die, or at 31, and there's a 50% chance you might die then. Would you take that risk? I'd like, yeah, sure. I would do that at 16 years old. And so I'm more worried about, you know, in some ways we put this fantasy, and I bought into it as, oh, I'm going to play in the league someday. And yet there's so many people who are severely wounded for the rest of their life, neurobiologically, psychologically, who never even get into a college game. And so, you know, when you see some of the studies about, and again, right now we don't have the live brain test yet. I think this could, I want to ask you what this might change your opinion of, but you know, it seems like there's some data out there to support that even, again, in those positions like linemen, that some of these injuries, some people are carrying level 1 or level 2 CTE by the time they're out of high school. And these people never have that kind of later on opportunity where, you know, I made, you know, $30 million, I'm set up for life. Not everybody sort of gets to that level. So, you know, I kind of think about this as football in general, and not just kind of the NFL rank, because we know such a small fraction of the people playing in middle school or high school now ever get on a college field, much less a pro field.
So why do you drive a car?
To support my livelihood.
More people get hurt driving cars. It pollutes the air. It does it. Why do you drive a car?
To get to places.
So why don't you say, you know what, I'm going to stop driving a car because there's it has a negative impact on people's health, and it has a negative what goes into not making that? And I'm not telling you should.
No,
I'm saying is, how do you approach that using a trauma-informed lens without not having to say, I'm not going to do it?
Right. One of my answers to that is I bought a Nissan Leaf. So I try, it's a harm reduction approach. You know, I'm still using electricity, but I'm trying to minimize my impact on that issue. Though with that said, you know, driving a Nissan Leaf still impacts the environment and other things. So
I'm just wondering about some of our audience, as opposed to one option is to say, I don't watch it at all.
Yeah.
And it's a very valid option to kind of do it. Is there other ways in which people can use their trauma-informed sensitivity to understand and approach and make some type of other decision in their lives, to kind of looking at that as they think about decisions about their own children playing sports, decisions about engagement? How do we kind of broaden this to kind of allow people to make a continuum of decisions using some of this knowledge and information.
Yeah.
And it's such a fundamental issue of I'm going to go right into the treatment realm, right? It's such a fundamental of treatment issues is balancing risk with intervention. Because there's risk protection and you would never do anything, right? We could just be safe 100% of the time, maintain it, never take a risk that something might go wrong or that an intervention might work. And then there's no risk of harm, but there's also not much risk of progress either.
Yeah.
So those are, I think Jerry, your point is just a wonderful one for thinking about treatment teams and in each one of our individual roles on the collective of a treatment team, that we're always balancing risk with potential benefit. And hopefully doing that better and better by coming at it, like Matt, from your position of coming at it from a position of awareness and of balancing risk instead of complete protection from risk or complete take every risk. Right? Neither one of those is where we want to be.
Yeah, and it goes down like our conversation a couple weeks ago. For me, this was in some ways a decision. Well, the trauma-informed thing, the lens kind of is over everything I look at because I think so much about this topic in neurobiology and I'm constantly reading about it. So it's something there, but one of my values, which I really see in my perspective is really tied to the trauma-informed lens of nonviolence, is how do we through our behaviors try to, and again, this is me thinking because I know nonviolence is not a value for everybody, is how do I eliminate harm through my, in some ways to look at this, my consumer dollar. Is buying a Nissan Leaf better than driving around my 2001 Subaru Forester for a little bit more time? My conclusion was, I got to kind of live my values. I also want to be kind to the earth. And that's really when I started to look at football. It's like, okay, and there's some stores, I won't mention them, that I don't go to either. If I hear things that I don't agree with, or I see behaviors I don't agree with, I won't support those stores. So it's really trying to figure out, how does my behavior align with the values I have? And I think, again, when you talk about that treatment aspect, I think it's a good thing as well, because a lot of times we have dilemmas in that too. And, to kind of sit with that dilemma. And that's what I did with football, is because I didn't want to come to the conclusion that I did, but between, the NFL kind of makes it easy not to like the NFL. It's like, I don't really want to support this company anymore. The fact they lied about the brain knowledge that they had really bothers me. The Kaepernick thing, and this kind of weird plantation mentality that sort of, I hate the concept of an owner. I think that, I think there's one non-white owner, so I think that there's a lot of things there that make, it falls in line with my values to not watch it, even though, again, I'm looking for the argument to tune in on Saturday at 6 p.m. to watch Notre Dame play. So again, the dilemma is still there. But again, it's one of those things too, is I just read an extra book a week. So now I see like the replacement behavior. It's like, and I support teams that may take you like they think they're going to win, but then the Colts play the Patriots in the playoffs and I'm devastated for 3 weeks. So, it is that sort of dilemma on many levels of, it doesn't fit anymore. And I think to look at our professional work as well as we can do that but that decision-making process and sitting with your dilemmas, because it seems like the more I live my values, including trying to be as trauma-informed as possible, the healthier I am too, and the happier.
I guess what I'm trying to get at is the NFL is the end product of a long journey for many, many youth.
Yes.
That then becomes commercialized and also, and all your arguments are very valid. I could see why. I guess when we talk about football and the trauma-informed lens, I wonder about how we can use this knowledge to inform parents and young people about how to get involved in these things and get the best out of them. And what's the best situation for children to be in that gets the best out of these experiences and minimizes some of these negative kind of outcomes that we're looking at. And so rather than kind of looking at the NFL and saying, that, because I have all sorts of issues around some of these things just as well as you do, and struggle with lots of those kind of decisions about, are they really making decisions about the safety of the kid, or are they making it about making more money? I can get into all that. But really, from a trauma-informed perspective, what can we share with people about what should they be looking for from a coach? What should they be looking for from an experience? How could they support their child managing stress as opposed to avoiding it or in some ways protecting from it? What are some of the things that they can learn from being empathy and understanding how to be a good winner and a good loser and kind of managing? There's so many good lessons and experiences that all along the way you could run into. To me, as looking at the NFL is one thing. Well, look at the Olympics and the number of young ladies that were abused and hurt and to do it. And how do you then watch the Olympics? Even though it's not me. I mean, they're not getting hurt physically to do it, but really the risk there of being with an adult in a position of power who was irresponsible and took advantage. So how can we begin to talk as a community about really making sports this healthy, interactive place that kids grow and learn in and kind of reach their potential, as opposed to a place that could seriously hurt them to kind of manage them? I think that, to me, is more the trauma-informed dilemma, and the worst extremes of that is the NFL getting your head crushed or going to the Olympics and getting.
Yeah.
But I know that I've talked to parents who've had terrible experiences with young coaches, with young people getting so into winning that they missed an opportunity to help children grow. And what should be the role of a parent in that position?
Yeah.
How do they manage the dilemma there?
Yeah. Great points all around. And Curt, I'd love it. Let me turn it over to you, because I'd love to get your thoughts.
Well, I was listening to Jerry talk, and as this happens often, I reflect on experiences that I've had with you, Jerry, and when you talk, I reflect on things about when we've been sitting at lunch somewhere or sitting in my office or, wherever we've gone. And one of the things that you were saying, like, how do you ask a great question? How do we get people to take the best parts of something and leave behind some of the worst parts? And I think the way that you can ask a question, even when you're presented with a position or an idea that you may disagree with, is probably the best example of how to start going about doing that, right? Like, you can, I know that I have said things in my kind of experience and relationship with you, and same with you, Matt, like when we talk about having different perspectives on things, and that one of the things that's most enjoyable is that we can start to ask each other questions so we understand what the other person is saying. And to get to the point that I think that you're saying is, how do we get people to balance both sides of an argument and balance dilemmas, is to even teach something as simple as, when you hear an idea you disagree with, ask a question. As simple as something like that can be, it's really powerful and very, I think, very trauma informed. I think a great way to say that, I think, is that is being trauma informed, is how do you manage the emotional reaction you have when you hear an idea that you disagree with?
Yeah.
And how do you stay curious in that moment? Another point that we've talked a lot about is remaining curious as often and as long as you possibly can, and keep gathering information and approach things from a position of awareness.
And Curt, let me ask you this, because I think you're the football player of the group, not just the fan. With because I totally agree with you both. I've had again, I think playing basketball up through age 22 helped shape me for who I am, and yet there was literal, my aces came from that world as well. So I had some of the worst moments of my life, both that could be measured. And I tell you, when your dad gets fired and you've got to walk into that school and your friend's dad fired your dad as a basketball coach, it didn't make the ace score, but I tell you what, it was
made the significant score.
Exactly. So up and down, but Curt, from your perspective, and I think as non-breeders, we can kind of be removed of this with everything, because I agree, we could argue of, okay, how do you structure a football program, a coach to be the best coach? But with what would you, let's say a parent comes to you with a 10-year-old and say they want to play football with everything about neurobiology and child development, would you start to talk to them? This is a very interesting question. I can't wait to get your answer about the right system to be in, or would you say you might want to think about getting this kid in a different sport?
I think I would say what do they want to get out of the experience, and then start from there and kind of work towards how to make a decision about what exactly they want and how to select what experience they want or what program they want to go to.
Yeah.
I mean, like you say, some of the worst experiences of your life have come from participating in sports, and on the other side, some of the best from mine have come from that, right? My even to this day, I have a very strong team orientation, and I love being a part of teams, and I can take that all the way back to being on a football team. Mm-hmm. And how much I remember saying this even you're reminding me of being 17, and I remember even saying this at 17, that I had 53 best friends. Mm-hmm. And they weren't my best friends after football season was over, but during football season, they were my best friends. And I could have a relationship with them that was very different during season, even than pre and post season, right? And we would connect over things even like workouts, and we would do things together that took effort, and we had to encourage one another, and all these great things that come from teams. Mm-hmm. I can trace all the way back to there, and I can also trace it back to my family, and that being one of 7 children, we had a team. we could feel the basketball team right there. We had our starting 5. So and
a couple reserves too. Yeah,
that's right. We had a 6th man. That's right. So I can trace a lot of great things that I still do today and still think today, all the way back to those things. So when you think about what you would want out of a sports experience, I think then deciding what sport you want and what program you want and what kind of coach you want, and all those things can then be derived from the answer to that question.
So you wouldn't necessarily tell that it's a bad thing for a 11-year-old to start playing football? No. Okay. Jerry, I'd love to get you
more clear about that.
I love this. I like this. Jerry, what are your?
I was worried that Matt's setting me up with a question a little bit, but I was pretty sure about that one.
Yes. And you're a dad and a grandfather, so this may be like, what if one of your kids came to you and say, "Hey, I'm thinking about getting my son," and I know girls play football too, at 10, 11 into full contact football. What would?
I first of all, I would realize that it's not my decision as a grandparent to make that decision. Right?
Very wise.
And what I would want is that my son or my daughter had as much information as they needed to make the best decision that they could for their child. I would also want them to be sensitive to what the child needed, right? If I made any mistake as a parent, looking back, sometimes my own excitement and drives were more in the foreground than my kids, right? So not always, but I would kind of hope that they could really be able to listen and help to kind of look at that. And that when you're young, I think it is up to the parents to be well informed and to help that child be in whatever experience they want, but what are the safety issues that have to be? And I can tell you is riding a bicycle. Yeah. When I grew up, we didn't wear helmets. We wear helmets today, right? To kind of look at that. So how do you do this in a way that is well informed and supporting? My son played soccer. Yeah. Well, really the data on soccer is concussions are a lot worse out of soccer than they are out of football, right? So when you look at every sport you play, there's some levels of risk that you're going to engage in. But there's also great rewards. And, just like ACEs, really the outcomes for ACEs are terrible. But the outcome for ACEs, for people who have strong relational connections, are significantly better. And probably the bigger issue is not the ACEs, it's your relational connectedness. That to kind of looking at that, right? And so I would be looking wherever my grandchildren went to, is how could they really be, instead of getting out there and feeling like if I don't succeed, I'm going to get kicked off the team, or if I don't do this, is how can they maximize that relational health of sports to justify some of the potential risks? Mm-hmm. Just to go out there to win and not to be, or to beat out somebody or to do it, probably is not really probably the greatest motivation to engage. I think when Curt talks about being a part of 53 other people he felt a connection to and belong, was probably one of the best kind of protective factors he had through high school, right? And there were probably other risks that you could have got into that because he had those protective factors, minimize those. So I think that this issue of sports in our society, or in all societies, is really a very important component that we kind of really look at. But what happens when, and I know my son went through it, when he was an all-star soccer player, all of a sudden other schools started calling him and saying, I can transport you over to our school so you can play for our school. I can put you on this competitive team on the other side, and we'll pick you up and we'll do it. My son made a decision to say, I'd rather play with my friends than be part of that. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where, even when there's some of the dilemmas that are happening to professional athletes that are now facing high school athletes, that are now facing middle school athletes, right? Is that as the elders, when do we set a limit and say, you know what? That's not what sports are about at this age. Mm-hmm. Right? Sports are about you go into your high school and you're connected to your high school and you're connected to your peer group, not about traveling over there to become, because you could then get into the best college and you're going to get, that really becomes, in some ways for a lot of parents, their way of thinking about sports. Mm-hmm. I think that's a negative outcome of sports.
Yeah. So it sounds like both of you would not discourage a 10-year-old from playing football.
No.
Fascinating.
You would. So you would, right?
I look at the data and knowing how fragile that brain is, and there's risk in everything, and the fact that I was in soccer and we did heading the ball at a young age disgusts me right now, but we didn't know any better. And that's where I wonder with like youth football, Again, and I respect you too, as much as any other people who talk about the brain in the entire world. I guess I look at the research and say, you're putting that young developing brain in a very high risk situation that could have lifelong consequences. And there's positive things as well. Like I said, I have no arguments against the positive aspects and the inherent negative aspects of sports in general. I just I look at the risk from what I've seen in that young brain and doing this. And I don't know. I think about my nephews, which is the closest thing that I have to children, at least in my family. And I think I'd really struggle watching them play in middle school, knowing that every time this is happening, there's micro concussions going on in their brain, where they could play a different sport like run cross country, still get the team aspect, maybe have a little less intensity there. And for the most part, their brains probably, unless you're like me and you fall down running and ram yourself into a fence, that there's not going to be long lasting neurobiological and psychological injuries coming out of that.
You know, Matt, I played football in high school and I played basketball in high school. And I can tell you my hardest shots came on the basketball court. Right? So when you describe basketball as this kind of really nice, you know very well, basketball is a very, very physical sport. And so in a way, I think you outlined all of the dilemmas that parents should be well informed about.
Yeah.
And really understanding risk reward, you have to kind of manage some of those types of issues. And I know there's a lot of parents today who are doing exactly what you're saying, I don't want my child to play. And I would support that. My job really is to inform parents of the potential risk of all these things.
Yeah.
Right? Not to make the decisions for them.
Yeah.
To kind of look at that. And I think that that's a very, when you go in, you know, when I go into somebody who's in a, growing up in poverty, outlining some of these things, I could tell you their perception of these risks are very different. Not just the kids, but the adults and everything else coming out of those types of situations. So I think that really that you would hope that we can, as a society, create the optimal situations for people to weigh out these issues and make the best decisions for. But Ed Reed, I believe, made the best decision he believed for the long-term health of his entire family.
Yeah.
Right? Given where he was at in that moment, would he make a different decision today when he's coming from a place of, I have money and I have resources and doing it? Probably so.
It would change the context of the decision.
It would change the context in which he was making a decision. So for parents who are in a different position, maybe their decision should be looked at differently.
I think too, I was thinking while you were talking, like about roles on teams that I think have kind of even played out in our discussion today, right? There's a role, and kind of while you were talking about the risks that you're seeing and, oh my goodness, how could we do this? I think that's an important function for a team. I like to call the canary in the mine. Every team needs one, right? Everybody needs to know somebody who's going to identify the risks for us and remind us about them. And hearing those and letting those ideas get expressed is really important. And also having a balance to it, right? So you had Jerry kind of come in with a balance and go, I have this other perspective that on the other side of these risks, there was this benefit that I had. And I'd experienced this risk a little bit differently, right? So there's these important roles that get played on teams. And I think seeing a team function, I mean, our discussion can be kind of a microcosm of that, of how you balance different roles and different perspectives in a team discussion about these kinds of issues. Because they come up, it's not just football, right? These come up all the time in what we do.
Yeah.
about managing risk and protecting others and making sure that people are safe, but also helping people to create growth and make some changes that they would like to make and give a little guidance. These are all the issues that come up. I was thinking that, while you were talking and also listen to the exchange between the two of you, is just that process is so important to the functioning of a group around what we do. And I think that's just fundamental to your kind of central question, Matt, of like, how do you be trauma informed in this way? And what kind of decisions do you make? And that may be one of them, right? You have a role, you talk about roles on teams and honor each role and listen and gather information and be open to people expressing their thoughts and feelings about particular issues.
Yeah. Let me ask you this question, because this is one of the struggles that I had. And there's 4 stages of CTE, and let's say we get the live brain CTE test, and we see that, let's say 40% of high school players by the time they're seniors let's just say 30% are in either stage 1 or stage 2 CTE level of the 4 stages. Would that change your thinking? I just kind of wonder if this is a lack of data thing in any way, shape, or form for you, or your opinions. If we get what I think is reasonable, that would be kind of what we would see, would be my guess. Would that change at all your perception of the advice you'd give to a parent like that would be a 10-year-old, knowing that there's a good percent, a 1/3% of a chance that they're going to they could be diagnosed for CTE by the time they're 18? Would that change any of your thinking?
It would change the information that I shared with them to make their decision, right?
Yeah. Jerry, what about you? Would you, let's say you're consulting with a high school that's wondering if they should have continue to support a football program, knowing that 1/3 of their players end up with a stage 1 or stage 2 CTE?
Matt, what's coming up for me around this conversation is a very similar feeling I had when I worked in child welfare. Is when is my role to step in and tell a parent what they're doing is hurting a child? When is it their role?
Yeah.
And I really struggled with that dilemma for a very long time to kind of look at that, right? And I think on one hand, if we had information that this child's brain was at great risk to kind of go play, what is our role in helping that parent make the right decision for that child? And what is the role of the parent to make that decision?
Yeah.
Very big issue, right? To kind of manage that. And I think that I would think that if we actually did CT scans on the general population at that age, we would have better information about what football is actually causing and what we're all at risk to do. And I would assume that there's some people who, based on the nature of their biology and their experiences, are at greater risk to play football than others.
Yeah.
Right? To kind of do that, right? And then there's some who are playing football for some reason, they're robust and they're doing fine, to kind of look at that. So having information to give to families is really important in general. And the more medical information we can get, the better decisions parents can make around. So we send people for physicals to play football or baseball, or someday we'll send them for some type of brain scan to say, here's some information we're giving you. Yeah. And parents can make some better decisions for their child, right? So for me, if I have asthma and I got to play sports, I've got to take certain precautions to play sports and to do some things. Maybe I become the kicker instead of the offensive lineman, right?
Yeah.
It's like, if I want to play that sport, my risks of playing an offensive lineman or a running back are too great for my parents.
Yeah.
All right. Or I go play another sport or whatever. But what you're raising is, as we get more information, do we make different decisions? And the answer is potentially yes, right? With anything that we do. That's what trauma informed is. I have way more information about the impact of trauma I had than I had 20 years ago. And I make different decisions. So as we learn more about the brain and the impact, and we begin to look at and understand, could we have this dialogue between the three of us, and it's 20 years down the line and we have all sorts of data and information, would I make a difference? The answer could be, of course. I hope so. So in answer to your question, theoretically, if I had a scan in front of me that said this child's brain is already being impacted in a negative way, would I clearly indicate to parents that the level of risk for this child playing the sport is significant? Would I make the decision for them? I don't think so.
Yeah. And I wonder if it changes if you look at it, if a high school is asking you that question about whether football should be a part of their mission and their extracurricular activities. Because I get telling a parent what to do. I don't go there. I bite my tongue. And it's not my job to tell other people how to raise their kids, especially when I don't freaking have any. So as you say, Jerry, my dogs are out of control most of the time. So yeah, like I'm not going to, but I wonder if a high school comes to you, and again, we have a little bit of data, which I would imagine my assumption that 1/3, and that, let's just say, just for hypotheticals, that is great. That's more so than the regular population. So we have proof that football does put people at a higher risk. And you were consulting with a high school, so these kids could go play, but is it a school? And this is where I think colleges are going to really struggle potentially too. What would you tell the school about that?
Who are you asking?
Either of you. Curt, let's go to you.
I think Jerry kind of said it well, right? That you would share the risks, and it depends on whether you're in the position to make the decision or you're not. And if you're not, you share information about risks, and you may make a recommendation that this risk is extremely high, and then people make a decision with the information you share with them. So that's how it would inform my approach to that. I think of my role as sharing information with people, and then helping them to talk through the dilemma, help them to work through the dilemma on both sides of the information that I just gave them, or that they came to me with.
Very cool. So I got one more final question, because we're hitting up against time here. Is an MI, I'll use my MI language here, because when we talk about dilemmas in MI, we have sustain talk and change talk. And neither of those are good or bad. So I want to take the judgment off, but it's just my language to say this. And sustain talk is, I think, for you both to continue to watch football. Change talk would be you thinking about not watching football like me. Mine would be the opposite. Again, no judgment on either side of that. But as you sit down this weekend, knowing Notre Dame's playing Virginia Tech, what is the reason why? Because if you watch football, your reason why to watch it is greater than your reason not to watch it. What is your main sustain talk to continue to enjoy what I think is the best game out there? So I wonder, because that outweighs, and I think we're ending up in the same place we started this conversation now, which is great, and you guys have been awesome putting up with me. But I kind of wonder for each of us, like, what is your sustain talk to continue watching, and how's that outweigh reasons, as we've talked about, to maybe not watch?
I think you framed the question really interesting, right? So change talk means I move to your way of seeing the world. Sustain talk is remaining in mind. I think that's how we approach people often. If they're moving in our direction, that's change talk. I think
but sustain talk is maintaining your current behavior. You heard me trying to take judgment out of it, Jerry. And then you put judgment back in it, Jerry.
I think the issue really is, one is it a dilemma, right?
Yeah.
Is it a dilemma to change? For you, there was a dilemma and you made a decision. For me, I don't have a dilemma right now watching to do it, right? I don't have a dilemma from that piece. So if you were to kind of look at that in your model, I'm in pre-contemplation. Right?
Oh, I made you talk about it for an hour.
I'm not really at this point struggling with, I think I balance it out. I don't watch it all the time. I play golf. If I want to play golf, I do. Right? So it's not manipulated, but I also don't avoid it.
Yeah.
I think for me, the real issue is the change for me today is if I'm with people who are struggling with this, how can I help them have as much information to make the best decision, informed decision that they're going to make, as opposed to I'm just doing this because my kid wants to play with other kids. And that's kind of what I would tell high schools, is that if all of your resource go into football, you're really not giving kids choice. You don't have to take away football, but we also don't have to put football at a level in our school that somehow you reach this other status and everybody's below you so that people become bullies and other, is that we really want to create as the adults that any choice you make to participate in activities that build these kind of capacities are really okay with us, and we support them all to kind of look at that. So here's a number of choices you have once I understand what you're trying to achieve, right? That's my goal, is let me understand what you want, and then how can I provide you information, alternatives to achieve that? And then you make a decision to do it. But I think sometimes in high schools, because traditionally there's a status connected to football, right? That to me is the issue that I think high schools have traditionally had to deal. The same thing is, how do we offer them to girls the same way we offer them to boys? These are issues that we want to take the best that we've learned that sports can offer them and really offer it in a chess club, offer it in a cooking class, but really, how do we get as many kids involved in these types of activities to increase self-esteem, to increase mastery of skills, and increase relational connectedness so that they're all healthy.
Awesome. Curt, what about you? Non-judgmental sustained thought versus sustained
Well,
stuff.
I mean, Jerry's the master of the balance and not walking into any question trap. So I'll just walk right into your trap. I'll tell you what I enjoy about it.
Yeah.
I always say that I love a good game.
Yeah.
I love the struggle, which may be why I talk about dilemmas a lot. And I kind of like the struggle. I like to struggle with the issue, and I like the exercise of doing that. And I take that back to all the things that I get to remember about what a powerful experience sports was to me growing up. And I remember what it was like to be with 53 of my best friends and feel connected to all of them, and to feel a common goal, and I can imagine almost myself feeling like I can use my experience of watching this game to regenerate those feelings and regenerate those memories. And it's really enjoyable for me. And I get to do that as a part of participating in this experience. And like, if it's even my favorite team, if it's a blowout win, I don't enjoy the game. I find it boring. I like it when it's close and when it's tight and people have to really try hard and really just get into the struggle. And I love the experience of doing that. So that's probably my biggest sustained talk, is just what I enjoy about it. And I love taking those things away from the experience.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate this conversation. For me, I think the takeaway is that, and I think I fall into a trap that a lot of people fall into, is that, when you really struggle with something and you do a lot of research on something and it makes you do something you don't want to do, you very quickly become very rigid sometimes in your thinking. And I think to hear that you two with again, two of the smartest thinkers I know, would it discourage a 10-year-old from playing football? Makes me rethink some of the conclusions that have kind of probably hardened a little too much in my own head. And I think that's a good thing. I sort of need that to breathe sometimes, because it's kind of hard for me to watch. There's a youth league down the street from me that I walk by every night, and I cringe every time I walk by. It's like, oh, those babies these are like little kids playing tackle football, and it's a really good balance. And that's why I appreciate these discussions. It gives
Matt, let me ask you, as you close, have you found a lot of success in any of your work just discouraging people from doing what they're doing? So I think that really presenting and helping people think through what they do and what questions they have and kind of do really helps. So I want to be clear. I may not encourage a 10-year-old to go play football.
Right.
But I wouldn't
necessarily discourage you.
I wouldn't discourage a 10-year-old to play football.
Yeah.
I would help their parents and them make the best decision that they needed to kind of make.
Yeah. And that's, I think we to tie this professionally, we deal with that all the time of changing behavior. And again, not that my conclusion is the right conclusion. And just so the audience know, I argued this. If you ever meet me and we have this discussion, I will not argue this hard. So you can talk to me about football. I still watch SportsCenter because, damn it, if you're in a cab in Pittsburgh, you better know what's going on with the Steelers. But at the same time, I think that to have like the safety and the relationship that we have to really explore this issue, have fun with it a little bit, but really explore it again. It helps. What I learned from this discussion is, okay, my rigidity after going through a painful process to me, even though, I'm not watching a sport I used to watch. So, way to end up in a good place in life if that's your hardest thing you're dealing with. But again, it helps me have a little bit more flexibility around this topic as well. And I think that's why really I wish our politicians could do a little bit more of what we did today. It's like, hey, we can take different sides. We can have fun arguing our different sides and do it passionately, and then learn from each other, and hopefully maybe gain a little bit of flexibility in our own thinking as well. So
is that part of the change process, that sometimes you have to get way on one side before you can come back to when you're making a hard decision?
Well,
your process to be compassionate for you is, I was like, this is a really hard decision for you. And so being a little bit on the rigid side helps you, as opposed to feeling pulled, I'm going to go back and get sucked right back. Being able to get back to you'll get back to the middle at some point.
Yeah. Jay,
he's in pre-contemplation stage on that.
Like if I'm going to go back to
what I'm saying, not for yourself, but for those around you, to help them to make the best decision for them.
Yes. But again, it's approaching people with flexibility. And like I said, I don't judge anybody that watches football. That is not a judgment that I make. But I think it's good to, I hope what we model too is to have these discussions, because if we can do this, even if we think very differently about treatment approaches or policies or how we approach care, have a safe place to have an hour argument about it, knowing that everybody's coming from a good place, and learn from each other. And I think that's kind of the fun piece about this as well. And I unfortunately probably will not watch the Notre Dame Virginia Tech game this weekend, but I may check in on the score on ESPN.
I'll text you.
Well, touchdown Jesus still loves you.
I know. Thank you, Jesus. Touchdown Jesus. Be good to us this week. Be good to us this week. We're on the road, I think, too, so we don't have touchdown Jesus looking over us. But Jerry, Curt, as always, thank you guys. I really appreciate it. This has been a lot of fun. And as always, you can find some show notes. I even came up with some discussion questions on this topic at traumainformedlens.org. And if you like this, I'd love to get your feedback on this topic. Again, we're not talking directly about care and services, but if you sort of like to hear us think about this, please throw out some other ideas that we could sort of struggle with along these lines that may not be necessarily about our services directly, but are how do we take this research and look at other life issues out there. So I've really enjoyed this and learned a lot, and I appreciate you both. And please join us next week for another episode. Thanks, everybody.